How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of your favorite Swimbait podcast, Scales and Tails, episode 169. We're joined by a painter today, all the way up there in the PNW, right? Yeah, that's where you're at.
Yep.
Okay.
Washington State.
Washington. Okay, I couldn't remember because I couldn't remember if
Yep.
you were Oregon or Washington. So up there in the PNW, a painter. We have not had a painter on in a very, very long time. You guys are probably familiar with Garrett's Customs over there. He gets posted by Bait Sanity. There's a handful of guys that you paint for, and you obviously post up baits on your site as well for sale. But Bait Sanity is kind of, I
Yep.
think, probably like the thing that I see you posted through the most. But we're gonna
Yeah.
introduce Garrett. Let him introduce himself. We have I think it'll be a pretty good episode. Like I said, we haven't talked to a painter in a while, and his paint jobs are something that I look at and I'm just like, "Pfft, yeah, I couldn't do that." So we're gonna pick his brain a little bit about the whole custom painting things, how he got into it, obviously, and kind of how he does it, and a little bit of his fishing style, and kind of maybe what he does with bait sending and all that good stuff. But obviously, we need to lay the basis, so we'll let Garrett introduce himself as always, and we'll get right into it for you guys.
Yeah. So my name's Garrett Allenson. Born and raised in Washington, and started painting when I was pretty young, and that's kind of what I do now is paint and fish. That's about it.
Heck yeah, dude. Did you start painting
Yep.
before you started fishing, or was it fishing and then painting?
No, I started fishing like at a really young
Okay.
age, and then I think when I turned like 16, I started painting because I was like, I gotta have some stuff that no one else has.
Yeah.
So, and then people started wanting that stuff. So,
Heck yeah, dude. So, growing up in Washington, how old are you right now?
I'm 21.
Okay, so we're right around the same age. I'm a little bit older than you. So you've been painting for right around that like 7 years, right around there probably. Four,
Yeah,
five,
I'd
six,
say,
7,
yeah, probably around six,
around
probably.
6. So I guess
Yeah.
the 6 years prior to getting into painting, being in Washington, was swim baiting something that you were familiar with, or like that you had seen it all?
I mean, I had seen some. Like, I grew up around like Hog Hunter, Bait Smith. Like, they're like 45 minutes from me. So, I've always seen some of these swim baits. You always see guys catching them around me. Um, but I was never like really, really into it
Mm.
until I started actually painting. Then
Right.
that's when I started seeing all the stuff from California. Yeah.
Right, yeah. We're this is just a stereotypical P&W thing. Were you big into steelhead fishing before you got into like swim baits? Was that what you were into?
No, like I've always done like a little bit of everything.
Okay.
I mean, back in the day, we were kind of always into like the trout fishing or walleye fishing. Like that's really big here.
Mhm.
But so is smallmouth, and we have really good largemouth fishing. So I started really getting into that when I was like 13 or 14 is when I started really getting into bass fishing. I'd
Mhm.
say before that, though, it was mainly trout and walleye.
Okay. Wow, that's surprising. Dude, I hear a guy who fishes in the PNW, my brain automatically goes to like steelhead trout fishing, kings, that sort of thing. And I don't know, that's just everybody I talk to, and that's kind of where I live is a huge steelhead trout area. So whenever I talk to people in the PNW, they're like, "Oh yeah, my dad was a river guide," or "I've that's what I grew up doing." So that's just what I always associate with young guys who get into fishing in the PNWs. Oh yeah, their dads were trout fishermen, and that's what they did when they were growing up.
Yeah, no, like my dad would always like he did some trout fishing and stuff, but I mean, we always fished, but not at the level like I do now. Like
Okay.
uh, once I started getting like really heavy into it, then my dad was like, "All right, well, I guess this is, if he wanted to do something with me, that's what we did is fish like all the time."
Heck yeah, dude. That's awesome. So getting into the fishing side of things, was like what I guess before you started to paint, before that, when you got around that 16 years old, was like were you ever drawn to like the art side of fishing, like the paint jobs like on the crankbaits or like on the jigs or whatever else it may be, or was that something that just kind of happened later down the road for you?
Well, I was always into like trying to make it more realistic. I
Mm,
mean, like I'd always look like you go into a tackle shop and you see all these crankbaits, and I mean they look all right, but then you just see megabass or like hog hunter now, like
yeah.
some of those paint jobs are like that looks like the real thing.
Mhm.
Um, then you start looking at all these other baits, like, I wish I had that paint job on this bait, and
Yeah.
that's where I really started like, I got to learn how to paint.
Mm. Dang, that's crazy. So I guess when you got into it, was like there anybody local to you? Like was anybody you know like into airbrushing or anything like that, like painting blanks or whatnot?
No, there was like nobody into it around me. I mean, I had known a few guys like Bass Jack, couple guys that were painting around the country, but like there wasn't like a whole lot. And, especially around me, there was nobody. So I had to learn all that stuff from the ground up. And it was extremely expensive. And like I didn't make any money at it for the first 4 years I did
Mm.
it. Like it was just kind of a money pit at that point, but it was fun to do. So.
Right, yeah. Did you have like any like art experience prior? Like did you excel in art class or anything throughout high school or middle school?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was always like somewhat into art. Like I could do it. I didn't never put a whole lot of time into it because like, painting on a canvas or something like that, I wasn't really into. But when I could apply it to fishing in general, I was like, all right, I can work with that.
Right, yeah. So, well, fast forward, you're 16, you decide that you want to get into the whole painting side of things. Was like, so when I think of painting, dude, I think of like looking at a bait and seeing all the layers that guys build up to like get the colors and get the hues and stuff. Was that because I'll be honest, when I start something, I look at like the best version of it. Like when I wanted to start making videos, I was watching like CJ's videos over in Arizona or Mike's videos or Jeff's videos or whoever's videos, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And I would just watch that and I would try to perform at the highest possible like level, like right off the rip, like just try to do the best stuff I could right off the bat and not really build up to it. And that kind of is kind of what bites me in the butt sometimes. So for you, was it something that you hit the ground and you're just like, I am gonna be the Picasso of the fishing lure world, or kind of what was it like for you when you first started? Were your expectations low, I
Yeah, I
guess is
mean,
a really easy way to put it.
for me, like it's hard to say because like when I started painting, like you paint something, you're like, oh, this looks killer, and I look at it now and I'm like, that was really bad.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, you look at companies like Megabass or some of those other ones, and I don't know. I've just experienced that if you try and like every painter is different. If you try and like copy a painter's feel like it's always going to look different. I mean, I can tell if a lure's been painted by somebody just by how much paint they spray on it, how they layer things. Like everyone's looks different. So I more or less like go out and go fishing and catch a fish, take a bunch of pictures of it, and like try and copy that. I mean,
Yeah.
that in the end goal, that's what I was trying to do was replicate nature, which is never going to be perfect, but you try and get as close as possible. And basically, you're breaking down a fish backwards. Like you look at a fish and you try and pick the colors apart backwards.
Yeah, which is absolutely
Which,
crazy to
as I
figure
started
out.
painting more and more,
Yeah.
yeah, like now it's like I look at a fish and I can basically break it down within like 10 minutes. I get a pretty good idea of how I'd paint it. Now, actually putting it together is a little different. I mean, some of the things you're like, oh, I know what I need to do, but trying to do that is really hard.
Yeah, yeah, I equivalent
But
that to like when I want to film a video, I have to like write out a shot list and like I know how it's gonna look in my head like after the fact, like when I throw it in DaVinci, but I need to sit down and I need to film it and I need to get the timing just right for this transition and I need to get it the angle right so the lighting's perfect. Dude, it's a pain in the butt, but like once you
yeah,
finally step back and you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, that was so worth it. I'm so glad I spent the extra 2 hours on this part because it just kind of makes it look way better at the end. And I like how you said you can tell like different painters paint jobs because it's the same with builders. You can look at a bait and like you can tell if it's a throwback bait based on like the way Kyle carved it or the way that it was made. You can look at one of Gilbert's baits and
oh,
you can tell the way his gill plates are and the face and like it's super cool to see that. And I don't think guys really ever comprehend that you can tell like a painter's paint from somebody else's just like when you look at it and you kind of can break down the way that they color their trout. Like some trouts that I've seen are like super, they have a lot of purple hue to them up in the top and then it fades down into like the greens and blues and stuff. And it's something that it's so diverse and in just one little, like I'm sure if you mix your purple a little bit lighter, that changes it and that you can break it down from somebody else's paint. Like it's kind of crazy to think about that.
yeah. I mean, like I've had a bunch of questions like why I don't sign baits because I never sign baits, and it's because like I can look at a bait and be like, yeah, I painted that, or someone else painted that just by how it was sprayed. there's that big of a difference. Especially, when you're a painter, you look at that kind of stuff too. I mean, there's a lot of things that stick out on paint jobs to me that no one would ever notice, but to me, it's like, oh, that stands out.
Right, yeah. So
But
going back to when you first got it, we'll go back to 16-year-old Garrett. Were you like buying like how Paul with Piz started? Like were you buying crankbaits and jerkbait blanks or kind of how did you step into the fishing lure painting business, I guess is the best way to put that.
yeah, so I had these big ideas of like, oh, I'm going to buy thousands of blanks and I'm going to be able to sell these. I'll put the best hardware on them and be able to sell them in local tackle shops and stuff. And I actually did that for a little while, but I was basically just like spending a whole bunch of time doing it, losing money, and not really gain anything out of it other than a little bit of notoriety. And I was lucky enough to have a couple local tackle shops that were willing to support me and at least give my stuff a try, which that was great of them. But yeah, it wasn't until I started getting into like the swim bait stuff where I actually you know put stuff together and was able to make products that looked real and that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, and I've always thought that like the whole, not to throw shade at anybody, but like the whole like plastic pouring, the young kids who get into plastic pouring, and I mean even like the painters, like where they're all painting the same 110 clones, like you really have to do something
Yeah.
crazy for somebody to buy your stuff over this guy down the road or the next tackle shop over, or even just buying the straight up regular version from Megabass or whoever else it is. And I always have understood that that's like the jumping board or like the dive board for it, but it's just like man, like that is really cutthroat, and it almost seems like you have to do something to set yourself really far apart, or you just have to stick with it, and it'll eventually come through. But you're gonna be grinding on that for a while to actually stand apart from somebody else doing the same thing.
Oh yeah, like I mean that was kind of the thing. Like I'd look at one of my products and I'd look at Megabass and I'm like, this is, definitely not as good. Like I put what I thought was better, hardware on it and whatnot. But I mean, you're still dealing with, a blank made overseas, and um, to actually make any money at it, like you'd have to sell tens of thousands of them.
Yeah.
And if you sit there one person trying to make tens of thousands, like it just wasn't going to work. I started taking some like business classes and sitting down and started penciling stuff out. And I'm like, there's no possible way that I can make this work unless I start charging $100 a bait, which
Mhm.
then you start dealing with like nobody's going to pay that for the crankbait as far as the average guy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's select few that will,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, and I
yeah. So
always
that's where I ran this like to do something different.
Yeah, yeah. And I always see like if a painter quote unquote goes viral in the fishing world, you know, from what I've seen, 99.9% of the time it's not because they painted a crankbait. It's because it's a big 12-inch 250 or a ghost or a
Yep.
frenzy or a hinkle trout, and it's like taxidermy work, and that's what draws a following to their page, maybe not necessarily the Bolsa
So,
cranks or the ABS clones that they're painting. It's something that people see and they're like, "Holy crap, that is something that I haven't seen outside of XYZ. That's badass."
yeah, and that's for sure. Like I've dabbled in all of it. I did the whole soft plastic thing. Like I spent thousands of dollars on like thinking that I'm going to make thousands on rubber worms, and
Mhm.
like it just wasn't going to work. And then like I've painted a bunch of baits for salmon guys and trout guys and walleye, and it's like certain groups of fishermen don't really want to pay a whole lot
Yeah.
for a fancy paint job. Like that's the hard truth when it comes to like salmon or anything like that. Like guys really aren't willing to pay more than $20 for a bait. Like they look at $20 at a bait and they're like, that's insane.
Hmm.
But then you come into the bass world and I there's guys that pay 700-800 bucks for a bait. Like and they're fine with it.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna spend that time and try and perfect a craft, like kind of have to be where some money is in it, and yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like you don't see a farm out in the desert because nobody's growing anything out there. Like you gotta go where the money is essentially. You gotta go like where it's gonna work out and where it's gonna be beneficial for you. And I mean, dude, during COVID and even like still now, there is a lot of people who are trying their hand at painting. Good for them, but again, like I said, it's getting to that
Insane.
Yeah, it's getting to that point where you've really got to do something or work with somebody or like have some pretty good patterns that people want over other people's to kind of maybe get notoriety or like get like constant workflow. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of painters now. Like I said, when I started, like there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, I think the first one that I really knew was like Bass Jack. Like he was, doing his thing at probably the prime, kind of right when I started doing the Swimbait stuff. And uh, yeah, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot, but now there's like a ton of them. And a lot of them are pretty good. I mean,
Mhm.
some of the stuff they're putting out is pretty impressive, and you know, yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing bass jacks like 250 trout 250s and the baby bass 250s in like 2018, 2017, and that was like the talk. That's what everybody was that was the comment section. Who should I send my baits to? And they're like, "Well, he has four of my 250s right now in a Hinkle trout, I would send it to him." I cannot imagine like what kind of like what his USPS person thought dropping these packages off every day to his house, bringing all these baits in and stuff for him to paint. It's kind of crazy to think about. And during COVID, I mean, same with everything. Like during COVID, the painting stuff like blew up. Everybody stuck inside. Everybody was buying those. What are those little air compressor, the Itawa or whatever air guns? Like everybody was buying those. Everybody was, oh, I'll repaint your baits for free or for $2 an inch or whatever else it may be. And then now those people that have stuck with it obviously kind of have a little bit more of a following, but every other day, you always see a younger kid or somebody just posting, "Oh yeah, I got this pancake air compressor and this air gun. Who can I paint some baits or what should I paint? What kind of paint do you guys want?" And it's kind of, I don't know, it's crazy. I thought about getting into painting for a while, but I was like, I do not have the patience for that, and I cannot crack a color code like that. No, I'm okay.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a lot more expensive than people think. Like to
Yeah.
do it right, like I've had a lot of people message me like, "Oh, what do you use for this? What do you use for this?" And I try and be as nice as I can, but it's like, if I give that up, like, I just spent all this money and time trying to figure it out, and like I've had people help me out. That's for sure. Like
Mhm.
Hog Hunter Swimbaits is one of the ones for sure. Like he helped me basically start learning how to paint, trout and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And ever since, like we've helped each other kind of build and try and get more realism in our baits. But yeah, like to do it right, it's really expensive to do and very time consuming,
Yeah.
and there's little tricks that you learn along the way to, either help speed up things or, help not cut costs, but, not spend a crazy amount on a bait.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's, you see all these people like, oh, I'll paint your bait for $10. And I've had people come to me and like, well, he'll paint my bait for $10. I'm like, well, I
Go ahead and do that
physically
then.
cannot do it for that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'm like, go for it. It's, if it's good, great. Like, you got an amazing deal. But I've also had a lot of them come back and all the paint's gone off the bait. And they're like, are you still willing to paint my bait? And I'm like, yeah, sure.
Man,
Like
that's funny.
it's part of it. I dealt with the same stuff. Like when you're learning, like you have a lot of issues of paint falling off and
Hmm.
like all these different things, clear coats and primers and different kinds of paints,
Yeah.
airbrushes, and then just having a place to do it too.
Hmm.
Building a paint booth, making
Yeah.
sure that you're not, sucking in all these fumes that are definitely not good for you. So, especially
Yeah.
the soft base stuff.
Right.
Like
Right.
that stuff really bad. And I've had quite a few people message me about that. And I basically tell them like it's not worth their time.
Mm.
As far as a custom painting deal, like it's not worth your time to even try it. It's really expensive to do and it's not good for you.
Yeah, yeah, dude. And it's
But
funny how you said like people have reached out to you and maybe asked for pointers or like the right direction to go because, dude, that's like exactly. I'm sure you've talked to builders before. I mean, builders get hit up all the time like, "Hey, where should I start with my resin recipe or how should I go about doing this or how do I make this mold or whatever else it may be." And every builder, man, there's a lot of nice builders out there and they're like, "Well, like here's a YouTube video that I watched when I got into it, but I literally cannot tell you what my recipe is because what if you go and mold one of my baits and now you can pour just as many baits as I can. Like this is the direction you can go
yeah,
into. I can point it to you, but I'm not gonna hold your hand and walk you down the road with it. Like it's more of a I mean, dude, there's builders who go through thousands of dollars, like you were saying, thousands of dollars of products to get to where their product is now.
Oh,
Not that I don't want to like jump you there, but you have to figure it out for yourself, and you're gonna lose some money. But that's just the way. That's how you have to get to where we're at now.
oh yeah, and like every builder's done it. Like I've had some conversations with Mike Gilbert, and it's the same thing. Like he'll have people that ask him, like, "Hey, how do you do this and how do you do this?" And he's like, "Well, I can't really tell you," and they get all mad about it.
Mhm.
He's just like, I've spent tens of thousands of dollars trying to
Yeah.
figure out stuff, and he's like, I just can't give that up. As much as like, you want to help somebody out, you also don't want to hurt yourself by doing that.
Yeah, dude. I don't know. It's something, and then people think that you're the dick because you're not. Oh, you just don't want to help me. You just don't want to see me succeed. And it's like, dude, like I had to learn just like everybody else does. I pointed you in the right direction. That was more than I had when I first started, or whatever else it may be. People, I don't
Yeah.
know. Hey, not to bash on people, but people sometimes are just not grateful for what little bit of help they might get from somebody.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So how did you? So we will talk about you were painting some crankbaits and stuff and got them into tackle shops and everything. Maybe you realize like, hey, I'm gonna have to buy every single overseas blank ever and make sure they all get sold to a nice home for $100 a piece to turn a profit or to be able to do this for a living. So
Yeah.
after that, like kind of after you get that like quote unquote wake up call, when did you decide or kind of how did you go about like getting into the swim bait game and like maybe seeing what paint jobs were worth in the swim bait scene and kind of how you figured out that that was kind of what you wanted to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, the first ones that I started messing with were S waivers because it was what I could afford. I mean, I like when I started, I never imagined even spending $50 on a swim bait, let
Yeah.
alone, four or 500. So that wasn't even in my thought process at that time. But yeah, I started buying S waivers, painting those, selling them, ran into some paint issues, but kind of worked through that. And then I think the first like big glide bait that I bought was an ice slide 262.
Mm.
That was like the first one. Like I spent $105 on it, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, and I painted that bait like 15 times, I think. Like paint it, take the paint off, paint
Yeah.
it again, like just trying to, come up with the realest color possible.
Dang,
But
dude.
yeah, I started doing that, and then had some guys send me baits. I think I had a couple Roman maids come in that I started painting. Um, yeah, just kind of started working my way up. I'd say like the first couple big ones though were like the first couple Hinkles that I got. When I started posting stuff like that, I definitely gained more people's attention.
Right. What were you I guess when you were buying like the S waivers and stuff, because I know like at one point in time S waiver was selling like those like or River to Sea was selling like the blank ones. Were you buying painted ones to figure out how to
Yeah.
prep and like care for baits before and after the paint, or kind of what was your process with that?
No, like in the beginning, like I didn't know any of that stuff. Like
Right.
at first, like I didn't know you had to use primer. Like I didn't know how important it was to like not touch the bait and all this stuff. Like I'm so careful about touching a bait. I'm like really OCD about it.
Yeah.
Like I will not touch a bait without gloves on, or if my gloves start getting dirty, like I switch them out.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's just any little thing like that may or may not hurt it.
Right.
And I went through a bunch of different clear coats, and I started with like water paints, and that was, it was pretty good, but there was like a lot of process to it.
Mm.
Like my process was crazy, like having to scratch baits and then prime them and scratch and
Yeah.
sand, and like I'd have 2.5 hours into a bait just on the prep work. Um, but then I started using, urethane paints and all that, where you get more chemical adhesion and didn't have to worry about that stuff as much.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm still like really careful about how I paint them.
Right. So when you got your first, well, here's a good one for you. So the Roman mates obviously are wood. Like, was that like one of your
Mm.
first kind of customer sent in baits, or what was like? We'll start with what the first like customer sent in bait was.
Yeah, I think it was Roman made. I was like scared to death to paint it.
Oh,
So I was like, I gotta sand this thing down. And I'm like, if I mess this up, like, that's $150, which at the time I'm like, I can't do this very much and I'm going to be broke,
Yeah, right, right.
so I was like really worried about it, painted it. Guy loved it. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And then, started moving my way up. But yeah, every time you step up into something like that, like even nowadays, like if I, paint a hinkle or something like that, like if you drop the bait and break it,
Mm,
you're, you got to try and find a new one,
yeah.
or something like that. And I'm always, I try and live by good customer service. So like not too long ago, I was painting a ZFG and the bill broke on it. And I was like, I just went and looked for one online and bought it. And the guy's like, oh, you don't have to do that. And, of course, everyone's pretty nice about it, but I
Mm,
was just trying to make it right. Like if it was my fault, it
right.
is what it is.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'd say the Roman maid was probably the first one that I was like, customer sent in bait that you start painting stuff like
Mm.
that. And then I got a few Roman made mothers in where it was, this is a giant bait.
Right, yeah. So with the wood baits, I kind of have an idea how you do it. So you sand it down to the wood, right? Like you take off all that paint, then obviously you put your paint on it. Do you do anything like with the clear coat to kind of preserve your paint so it doesn't like rash up and start to swallow the wood, or kind of what's the process with that? If you want to
Yeah, I
share
mean,
it,
you try and
obviously
seal the.
don't feel like you have to
Yeah, I mean, I
out
can
your
share a little
secret.
bit. Like wood's kind of always a pain. Like you can seal the wood, but eventually the hooks are going to go through that.
Right.
You know, most guys are never gonna they're never gonna use the bait enough to really get through that.
Hmm.
It takes a guy throwing a bait a lot to
Yeah.
chew through clear coat paint and pretty good into the wood. But yeah, I mean, I try and seal the wood, and then by the time you put primer and paint and clear coat on it, then I just tell them like kind of watch it, and I basically tell people like if you're fishing the bait that much and it starts to chew through, like send it back to me and I'll do it again.
Mm.
You know, I mean, if you're willing to throw my paint job that much and you have that much confidence in it, like I got a couple guys that all they want to do is throw stuff that I've painted because that's where their confidence is, and I'm willing to you know help them out.
Right. Yeah,
So
yeah. When you get a bait in, it's like that ZFG, it was either the catfish or the thundermouth or whatever, I assume.
yeah, it was the trout
The
one.
trout.
I think it was the thundermouth.
Yeah, so do you well, I don't even know. Do you punch the pins out or do you keep the bait fully assembled to paint it?
It just depends. I mean, you got to try and get all the paint and stuff off, especially if it's chipping or anything like that.
Right.
Like then it's like you definitely have to get it all off there. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'll disassemble them if it's fairly doable. But
Mm.
if it's like a major deal to disassemble a bait, or if I'm not like super experienced with the
Right.
bait, then I just do what I can as far as the joints go. Other than that, though, everything's pretty accessible without taking them apart.
Is there ever baits you get in like somebody sends you a hinkle that Piz painted 5 years ago? Do you ever get baits and you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I'm about to paint over this?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. Most of the time, it's either like the paint's coming off that, they had painted it, or, again, had somebody paint it and the paint's coming off, or it's a blank. Like, I get a lot of blanks, especially when it comes to Hinkles. Most of the time, it's, Andrew sends them out to somebody and they send them directly to me.
Mm,
Um, I mean, most of the time, it's not painted stuff.
right.
I'd say, like, probably some of the worst ones is like if it's a super, super rare bait or something like that, because then it's like, if you, like I said, if you mess it up,
Yeah.
it could create issues.
Right. Have you ever painted
Uh,
like a Pats or anything crazy like a holy crappie or something you don't see very many of?
oh yeah, I had painted one. I think it was like a piz that he had only made a couple of or something
Mm.
like that. The guy's like, oh yeah, I could sell this for like $1,100 on eBay, and that puts a lot of pressure on me. Like, oh
Yeah.
man, I do not want to mess this bait up.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
And especially like even Hinkles like a couple years ago, like
Yeah.
they were going for such an insane amount. And when I got somebody sending me in, like they're acting like this was their child,
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I mess this up, like there's no chance I'm going to get one within a year,
Right.
not unless I'm willing to pay, $1,100 on eBay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I've basically painted like every bait out there. I painted a lot of baits.
That's crazy. Is there a preference on, so you get a blank, say you get a fish everything hater, one of the scaled ones, and then like a flea shad that doesn't have any scales from like throwback. Do you have a preference on if there's already texture, or if you have to like partake your own texture, or kind of what goes through your brain with the when those two bait styles
It,
show up?
it depends. It depends on the pattern, but as a painter, you can definitely do more with a smooth bait
Yeah.
because I can add scale, the scaling and stuff. Like you can do some wild things with scaling. When you start adding texture, like even a hinkle, for example,
Yeah, with
that's,
those pits.
when you start putting dots and stuff on there, it just kind of all blends in, and
Yeah.
scaling doesn't really like show a whole lot. Um, but if you get like a really smooth bait, um, like a Metro or something like that, like
Right.
you can make those look pretty sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, I always thought like because I said that I thought about painting. I did start my painting career. The first ever Hinkle I got, I just took a spray can to it like multiple times. So there is a Hinkle trout out there. If you guys ever see it for sale, it is spray painted army green, like OD green. It's got a silver. I painted the top silver. Called it like armor trout or something. Caught a couple fish on it though, but it is absolutely horrendous. But if
Yeah.
you guys see that bait. There's like 4 layers of spray paint on there, and whoever paints it, I am very sorry about that. But when you get like a Hinkle that has to get repainted, do you worry about like getting in all those pits and everything, or are you just pretty sold on the paint's gonna stick to them and it's gonna be okay?
It depends. That's always like thing for me. Like if I always try and get all the paint off, but if
Mhm.
there's some that, I just can't get the paint out without just destroying the bait, basically, I tell them, I was like, I'll paint this as long as it looks good to you, fish it. If you ever have an issue, just let me know and
Yeah.
I will make it right.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, you can only do so much without actually like destroying the baits.
Yeah. Yeah. And that like
I try and tell people like, if you're gonna get a bait and if you have like a blank or something, just send it to me right away
Mhm.
before messing with it, or it's just easier that way. It'll
Right.
come
Yeah.
out cleaner.
Yeah, yeah. And it'll be, kind of I don't know, it's really dope that you straight up say like, "Hey, this is what we're working with right here. It may have a failure, a couple months down the road if you're fishing it hard. If you do, let me know. I'll make it right." But it also is kind of
Yeah.
the point where like if it was a blank and you guys had somebody else paint it or you guys rattle canned it, like it's kind of like well, maybe next time you guys will just send it right to me and then we won't have to worry about crossing this bridge on a later date.
And I've had that happen a lot. Guys go back and forth, and they have something painted or they paint it themselves, and it doesn't end up like how they want it, and they're like, "All right, next time I'm just gonna send it to you." I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, I'm not gonna pressure somebody and be like, "Oh,
Right.
you need to have me painted," or "I'm the best there is." Like, I don't do that kind of stuff. It's you know,
Right. Yeah. When you get a bait, so say you get a Metro in, and it's been painted, it's not a blank. Or do you take like 220 sandpaper and scuff it up just enough so that the paint has something to stick to, or do you take that all the way down to the bare resin?
if it's a smooth bait, like I try and get it as close to the
Okay.
resin as possible.
Hmm.
Um, just for like, I mean, a lot of these garage builders have these baits so fine tuned that you start
Yeah.
adding thickness of
Yep.
paint and clear coat, like it actually affects the baits. So I'm going to try and get as close to, stock as I can. Uh, but yeah, I always try and get it down to a base layer as far as like I know to where I'm not relying on somebody else's paint job to hold up my paint job. Like I don't
Right.
like the idea of that. I'd
Yeah.
rather if something's gonna fail, it's mine and I have no excuses that way.
Yeah, I didn't really even think about that. It's like you're building a deck over somebody else's deck if you don't get all that paint off and you just hope that their deck doesn't collapse or else yours is SOL. It's like it's literally the same exact thing. You're hoping that their paint sticks on the bait so your paint sticks on their paint which sticks on the bait. Like that's a crazy thing to think about.
Yeah, and I've learned my lesson the hard way. Like I've, done that a couple times. Like I did it on a depths once and the paint just like peeled off when the guy got it. And I was like, that's I can just imagine like you send a bait to somebody and wait a couple weeks or a month or 2 months or
Yeah.
more, whatever it is, and get it back and then the paint comes off. Like that really sucks. So
Mhm.
I try and keep from that. I paint a lot of baits now, and I've done it enough now that I've kind of worked through all those issues. But every single painter like has to work through that stuff, and they're gonna have issues. There's no paint system that's bulletproof.
Right. So one of the first painters I ever had on was Aquatic Marlin. That was June 27th of 2022. So this was a long time ago. Obviously, he doesn't paint anymore if you're familiar with him. And I'm pretty sure
Oh yeah.
we were talking about like the 250s and stuff, and I cannot remember exactly how he said he paints them. But when you paint a 250, do you take the skin off and paint the skin and then do like a base layer on the actual foam, or kind of how do you paint? How do you go about painting a 250 since it's kind of a weird like two-part bait essentially?
So I mean, I try not to take them apart. The paint that I use for them actually adheres to the
Oh,
plastic
okay.
um, on the outside, so I do it that way. I mean, if you start taking things apart and something happens or it starts leaking water, like there's just the more you start taking apart, the more variables there are
Yeah.
later on for failures, and then you're the one to blame. So it's
Mhm.
like I try and avoid that, and it looks so good on the outside. And I had when I first started doing like the 250s and just soft baits and general that kind of stuff. I had some guys go test them and just kind of put them through the ringer, and as long as it held up good, I ran with it. So.
Yeah. Yeah, the
But again, being
250.
like extremely clean on stuff is very, very important.
Right.
Like I
Yeah.
see guys like posting pictures of baits and they're holding it in their hand, and I mean most of the time it'll probably be fine, but that one time that, some oil from your hand gets on the bait, and like I can't do that.
Yeah, or random off-ball chance that it's a custom tuned 250 and you take the skin off and you watch that little lead ball or whatever just shatter into 20 pieces on the ground. You're like, "Oh crap. Well, he's going to have to retune this and
Oh
he's
yeah.
not going to be happy with it."
Well, I mean, even like regular 250s, like if you look at a 250, like if you take it apart after you fished it for, I don't know, a month or something, it has micro cracks throughout
Yeah.
the whole
Yep.
body of the bait.
Hmm.
Like, so I mean, you never know. Like, you might take that apart and the whole thing just
Yeah.
shatters.
It might not be
Like
compressed and it might open up a little bit and you might be screwed.
yeah, like I just never want to take the chance. I mean, I'd rather paint the outside, and 250s always turn out really good, especially in a trout pattern like that. That bait just suits a trout pattern perfectly.
Yeah, yeah, it always, I mean, the 250s, the custom painted 250s always look good, especially like a trout pattern. Oh, like you said, it always comes out really well. Is there
Yeah.
is there a garage bait that you like painting? Like you get one, you're like, "Oh, dude, this is so easy, gonna whip it up and I'm gonna be done in 4 days." Like it's like easy prep work, like maybe the paint's like super easy to pull off, or they only sell blanks. Like this, maybe a builder only sells blanks. There, oh yeah, this is gonna be a blank. It's gonna be super easy to build, or super easy to paint, I should say.
No, I mean like as far as like the paint coming off, like that's always like the worst part of custom painting. Like if I had to tell somebody like, well, the worst part of it is taking somebody else's paint off.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, if you're doing it right, you spend as much, if not more, time in the prep work than you actually painting the baits.
that's crazy.
Um, and if anybody's sat there and like hand sanded
Mm,
hundreds and hundreds of baits, like it really sucks.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's any that are easy. I mean, there's definitely like baits that I look forward to. Like I always love trying new baits and
mm,
painting different baits. Um, the one that really stood out to me was BGC Gen 3 8-inch trout.
yeah.
Like that bait always looked so killer with the trout pattern.
Mm,
It still does. Like that's and swims amazing. Like it's one of my favorite baits to paint because it's smooth and I can do a lot with it.
right, yeah. Is is there like is it easier to custom paint ABS baits? So like the Chad Shad, like the toxic baits, because that paint correct me if I'm wrong, that paint's like in the plastic, right? Or is that like printed on the plastic? Is it easier? Like you don't have to sand it down, you can just paint it like it's a blank?
I'd no, I mean it's you still like I still try and get the paint off. Like
Okay.
I mean I've done a ton of DRTs, like that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. But I mean even companies like that, like they have issues where paint comes off.
Mhm.
Like a foiled DRT, I will never
Breaks.
just
Yeah.
paint over that. Like I
Right.
have to get all that off,
Hmm.
because it's like once they get through my paint, like there's a good chance that it's coming off. So
Right.
you know, I mean, they look good. Don't get me wrong, and there's no way around it. Like if you want a foiled bait, like chances are, unless you're using like epoxy over that and then painting and
Hmm.
multiple layers, like the foil's gonna come off. It's just a weak point. That's why I don't do foil.
Right.
But yeah, I always try and get the paint off, even if it's an ABS bait. I'd say they're about the same as far as trying to get the paint off and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, because dude, those DRT foil baits, I had like a JDM smelt color. It was like a turquoise or not even turquoise. It was like a yellow, bronze, and red color. And after a day of fishing it, I mean, there that paint, it like you said, it's just is gonna happen. It's just gonna fall off, and you'll be fishing, you'll look
Oh
down,
yeah.
and you'll have like little shreds of paint in the bottom of your boat or floating through you for fishing the river, whatever else, and it's just like, damn. This thing is just getting eaten up right now.
Oh yeah, I mean and it's not because DRT doesn't know how to paint because like you
Right.
take one of their baits that's not foiled, that paint is extremely extremely tough,
Hmm.
extremely thin and very tough.
Yeah.
It's just that's just how foil works. I mean, and I've when I was painting crankbaits and stuff like that, like I tried messing with foils and it just always ended badly. So I was like, I'm not even gonna worry about that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
dude. It's once you start like making your work like a liability, that's when it's like, dude, is it like really worth like do like putting the time into this, putting my name on it, and then somebody coming back in 2 months saying, "Hey, dude, like this is starting to flake really bad." You're like, "Oh my gosh, why'd I ever decide to do that? Like this is gonna bite me in the butt."
Yeah,
But yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like I try and avoid those situations. I mean, some guys like something will happen and they send it back or I fix it for them or whatever and they're fine with it. And some guys like something happens and they freak out and want nothing to do with you ever again. So then, you're losing customer base or something like that. So you just kind of have to be careful on what you do and how you go about things. But
Right.
I mean, things are going to happen no matter what. Like
Yeah.
that's a part of it.
Yeah. I just had like a really, really decent question for you. We were talking about people sending their baits in. Oh, crap. What was it? Damn it. I'll have to come back to that. Oh, that's what it was. Living in the PNW, obviously, like obviously Washington, Oregon are super well known for all the rain. Raining 270 days out of the year, whatever else it may be. When I was talking to Clayton from Sly Guy Lures, he was talking about how he had to build like an AC heated booth to combat all the humidity and stuff. Is there ever times like where you're battling the humidity to get paint to stick on and not flake off, or like do you have your booth kind of pretty set up to be able to spray in the whole year, no matter what the weather's like outside?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Eastern Washington, so it's a
Okay.
little drier. Like we
Okay.
don't get near as much rain as like Western Washington. Like they would probably be an issue there,
Mhm.
as far as like having to worry about it more. But
Right.
I'm in like a heated shop. Like my paint booth is within a heated shop,
Mhm.
so I'm able to control it a little easier.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't worry about it a whole lot. I mean, there's things you have to do, like as far as paints changing a little bit, thinning them out or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to be a huge issue.
Right. And
My
then
issue is more like heating.
mm, like keeping the shop
Because I
warm
mean, it
for your
gets so
paint to
cold.
like cure and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, last year we had some days where it was like -10, that kind of stuff. It's really hard to heat a paint booth when it's that cold. I mean, I like multiple heaters on, the shop heat on, like
Yeah.
just trying to get it to 70 or 75, and you know, paint just does not like cold.
Yeah, damn, dude. That's what I was gonna say. Do you have like different cure times? Like, so say I send you my Hinkle trout, you get it painted. We'll say you get it painted up on a Monday. are you letting that bait sit for like 2 or 3 days until like Thursday to ship it back to me, or kind of what's your wait time as far as like you're done, you're gonna let that thing cure, harden, whatever paint's got to do for it to not get smudged in the bubble wrap or whatever else it may be when you send it back?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the time of year. Like summer, I can definitely do it faster, but I always at least give it like a week.
Hmm.
Like I just hate to send a bait that I'm not like 100% sure
Yeah.
on. Uh, I mean, I've done it faster just because guys are like, "Oh, can I get it by this date or this date?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind of a risk, but
Right.
just let it sit or whatever." Like it, because really, clear coat takes like a month or more to fully cure.
Mhm.
Um, but within a week, I mean, you're good to throw it around and kind of do your thing.
Yeah, because I know like when you freshly paint a car, you're supposed to keep it like in the garage for like 2 or 3 weeks for it to all cure, and like that's just kind of crazy that it's the same thing with baits. I guess I never thought about it in that aspect or that like that viewpoint of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've heard from like multiple car painters where it's like 3 months is really like the timeline when your car is actually fully cured.
Hmm.
But I mean, in in an industry where everybody's moving that fast, like you
Right.
can't wait 3 months.
Yeah.
No one wants to wait that long for their bait to as it's sitting there, and like for me to hold on to all these baits and just have them hanging around for months on end. Like I don't do that.
Yeah, yeah. There was a color recall for a couple of like the second gen Tacomas, and that's because like the paint was flaking off and stuff, and everybody assumed it's because that color wasn't cured long enough or they didn't have the mixture good. So it's just it like after like 2 years that paint would just start flaking off on one of their whites, and it was a big lawsuit, and I'm pretty sure it was either because they weren't letting them cure long enough or something along like the prep work or something with that color, and it just came back and bit them in the butt big time.
Oh yeah, like I said, prep is everything. I mean, like even if you're prepping a bait, like that's how your bait's going to turn out is how your prep work
Yeah.
was. I mean, that's everything, whether it's cars or baits or anything that you're painting.
Yeah.
The prep work is probably the most important part. That's going
Yeah.
to be how reliable your paint is, how your paint actually looks. Like if you got sand scratches in there, and I think like the biggest obstacle for baits is like the little micro bubble
Yeah.
type stuff where there's like little holes in the baits. But I mean, sometimes you just got to kind of not worry about that stuff.
Right.
Um,
So,
just is
uh,
what it is.
funny enough, my normal job, part of the job, we refurbish old propane tanks. So we have to take the paint off, prep it, put new powder coat on, cure it, and everything. And like I've been around painting and like stuff for a lot of my life, but like this is like the first like hands-on job that I've gotten to do it with. And it's like, yeah, like if you don't get all that old paint off and they put new paint on, that stuff will just crumble off or it won't adhere to the actual steel of the tank and it'll fall off and rust within 2 days of being outside. And it just like goes to show that, like you said, prep work for any part of the painting process or any painting process is like a huge deal on like the longevity of what your product is going to look like and how good it's going to hold up, or even if it's going to hold up at all. It could be in that box and somebody could peel it open and the paint could come off on the bubble wrap or something crazy like that. Like it's like a make or break
Oh
process,
yeah.
and it happens a lot. Like I mean, dude, there's even times where people will post that they got a bait in the mail from the builder and like the paint's still wet. Like they didn't let it cure at all. Like they shipped them, put them in boxes and they were gone and all within 12 hours of being painted and cleared. And I don't know, it's kind of crazy seeing like the horror stories like that.
Oh yeah. And it's like I said, like I don't care who the painter is or how many baits they've painted, like they're gonna have issues
Yeah.
eventually at some point. Um, I mean, it's just part of it. But yeah, that's as far as like paint curing, yeah. I wait a while, but not like a crazy amount of time.
Right. Yeah. So when I had Marlon on, he was like, I think you like had been painting soft baits, maybe just getting into it or had been doing it for a little while. And he was like hitting you up
Mm.
asking for questions. And then at the time, he thought that he was going to be painting a little bit longer. So he was like, that was the big thing he was talking about. Like, I think I'm going to learn how to paint soft baits. It's something that I think is really cool. There's only a couple guys that do it, whatever. And he had mentioned you. And so when did you start painting soft baits and kind of when did you decide to pull the trigger on messing with that? You had mentioned earlier how it's like sometimes really it's maybe not even worth it with what you have to deal with, like with the fumes and the chemicals and the reactions and all that stuff. So how did you get into it?
Yeah, I mean, well, like I got into it because that's kind of, I started, going and painting for Hog Hunter and,
Yeah.
learning how to use soft paint and all this kind of stuff. So then I was like, looking for my spot in the painters community. I was like, okay, there's no one doing soft bait repaints.
Hmm.
There's all these guys that want, at the time there wasn't tyrants or anything like that, but that's
Right.
probably like my number one bait that I paint soft bait wise is
Hmm.
probably a tyrant. Like I repaint a lot of those.
Mm.
Um, and so there was a market for it at the time where there was nobody doing it.
Right.
But then it's like you have two different styles of paints. One of them, like I ended up spending like $2,500 on an oxygen mask just so I could paint the stuff to where I'm not breathing these
Breathing.
fumes. Because even if you have like a regular mask, like your eyes start burning and all this kind of stuff, it's like it's not good. And and I had talked to Marlon, like you were talking about, and
Yeah.
he had asked me about some of that stuff, and I just told him I was like, yeah, I mean, you could probably paint some and do decent at it, but if you're not going to do it for a while, it's not worth the amount of money
To get
um,
started
and
into it.
just overall deal with it. Yeah, like it's just not worth the time. Which
Yeah.
I'm glad he ended up not doing it because if he was going to quit painting that early, like he definitely would have
Right.
probably not made his money back on it.
Yeah, dude, yeah. I didn't even think about like the respirators and stuff because I've seen Mike paint like the tyrants and stuff and like the respirator he has to wear for it, like the full like gas mask with the eye clear and just the big filters and stuff. Like that's crazy to think about. And I mean, I don't know. That's like you said, you have to make sure you're in it for the long run, or at least you're gonna make it worth it, and you're not gonna be out $2,500 and make $500 off 10 tyrants to paint or whatever it may, whatever the cost comes out to be. Like
Yeah,
you have to, okay, I'm gonna invest in this, and I'm gonna stick with it because I need to make my money back at least. I draw a formulated opinion after I break even, like if I want this is something I want to do or not.
yeah, and I mean just like overall health, like
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of like all of us painters have to be worried about that. Like they're not. There's a reason why they stick to baits and like you can and they smell horrible is
Yeah.
because it's not good for you.
You're
They're
right.
straight up chemicals. So you really got to watch that. And I don't care what kind of precautions you take on, trying to be safe about it. Like you're going to be exposed to it. Things are going to happen to where it's not good for you by any means. Like
Hmm.
even hard bait stuff, like it's not good for you.
Right.
But it is what it is. There's a lot of things and
Yeah.
that aren't great for you.
Right. It's more about like probably limiting the time around that and like limiting the time to exposure and I guess just making it, is making the situation as good as it can be. Like you said, you're gonna be around it. You're freaking spraying it out of a gun right next to your face. Like you're gonna be around it, but if you
Yeah,
can limit the amount that you're exposed to throughout the day, it's a lot better than not giving a crap at all.
yeah. I mean, like I've been around like some of the taxidermy industry and car industry and stuff, and like you hear a lot of these older guys that used to paint 50 years ago and
Yeah.
lived about 50 years
Right.
because they're in there spraying a car, clear coating it without a mask on. I
Mhm.
mean, just stuff like that. Like that's our bodies are not designed for that. So yeah, I mean, if anybody is going to get into painting, like worry about the um, taking precautions before anything else. I mean, that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, right, right. Talking about the paint or talking about the soft bait. So obviously, is painting a citizen different than painting a tyrant since the tyrants are already, kind of painted and the citizens are just like the poured colored plastic or, whatever material it is. Is there a difference and kind of obviously don't go too in depth about it, but is there a difference on how you approach the two?
Yeah, I mean, there used to be a bigger difference when Mike was doing the older citizens.
Hmm.
The plastic that he was using was like really oily.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I know
Um,
exactly what you're
and
talking about.
just it was really oily, more porous. Like
Yep.
you'd paint it and it would want to fish eye and do all these different things, and it was kind of a pain. But now, like the new citizens that he's doing, it's basically the same plastic as the tyrants. So
It's more
there's not a
consistent.
whole lot of difference as far
Yeah.
as, yeah, the plastic's just a better, I don't know if necessarily a better quality is the right word, but it's the right one to be painting, I guess you could
Yeah.
call it.
It's got better characteristics for a guy like you who's trying to paint them.
Yeah, it accepts paint better, I
Right.
should
Yeah.
say.
Is there a difference from a citizen to like a burrito gill, like where it's a silicone rather than a plastic? Like, do you have to kind of switch any of your methods or kind of come at it from a different angle, so to speak?
Silic like silicone's a whole different animal. Like you got to have a whole nother paint for silicone. Like I don't
Oh,
really
okay.
mess with silicone because I don't have, I haven't been asked for it a whole lot. Actually, as of lately, there's been a couple guys asking me about it, but again, that's going to be like probably another couple $1,000s to get into that, and then I got to store another type of paint.
Hmm.
If I'm not using, all paints have like somewhat of a shelf
Like a
life.
shelf life, yeah.
So yeah, so if I'm not, using, let's say I buy a quart of each color or whatever, I end up buying. Like if I'm not using that every year, like I don't like to keep paints longer than about a year.
Hmm.
Um, so if I'm not going through that stuff, then
Yeah.
it's not worth it to me.
Damn, I didn't even
But
think. And like they're so just off the top of my head, silicone bait builders. You have Burrito, you have DC out of Minnesota, and then you have like Real Prey. Those are, I think, the three off the top of my head that I can think of that are like silicone baits. Maybe I'm missing some. I don't know. Looking around frantically, but like you keep $2,000 worth of paint and spend $3,500 on a new machine and a new respirator and stuff, and you only have three bait build. We'll say five bait builders to pull from. Like that market is so small. Where's the return on investment at that point? If you have to
yeah,
paint 400 from each bait builder to break even on that initial investment, it's like I don't really know
yeah,
if it's like maybe the best time for that right now. Maybe 3 years down the road, maybe Mike will come out with a silicone bait, and a whole bunch of people might come out with silicone baits. Whereas that point, it's obviously more worth it to you. But like you said, right now it seems like that part of the market's kind of a little bit smaller than the quote unquote like plastic baits we have.
yeah. And I mean, there's so many different types of silicone too.
Mm.
Like there's a couple silicone baits that I can paint. Um, But I mean, there's some that are completely different. And then you go
Right.
into like Elastec. Like
Mm.
I have some paint that I can paint Elastec with, but it's completely different paint.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't done like a whole lot of it because it's not, no one's really having that stuff painted. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, there's all these different types of plastics, densities of plastics, and they're all made with something different, whether it be small changes or large changes. There's something different about it that either accepts paint well or doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's kind of back to that thing where it's like I don't want to paint something for somebody and then send them the bait and all the paint comes off of it.
Hmm.
Like the
Right.
first time I tried painting like a burrito bait, like it looked fine, and I take it out and I try and crumple it up and like basically put it like what you would through it, and the paint just starts like peeling off of it. I'm like, yep, no, that's
Yeah.
not gonna work.
Hmm.
So
Do you do you like painting soft? Well, okay, it's gonna kind of maybe sound like a weird question. Do you like painting soft baits because of the longevity of your paint, where it's not getting beat up by treble hooks and stuff? Like, do you think that the paint maybe I don't know, I guess like lasts longer, like looks better because it doesn't get all beat up if it's like a jig hook or a beast hook?
yeah, I mean, not necessarily. Like I don't know. Like I paint so many baits anymore. I
Right.
kind of
A
like
bait's a
I'll
bait.
paint soft baits for like a month or two, and then I just like I don't want to see another soft bait.
Mm.
Like I get to the point where I'm like I just want to paint hard baits, and
Yeah.
then vice versa. You do the same thing. But yeah, I mean I don't mind seeing the hook rash. Like to me, just seeing a bunch of hook rash on a bait just means like that person is super confident in
Right.
my paint job on their bait.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's like Daryl Danowski on the
Oh
west
yeah, I
side
was gonna
here in
ask if you knew
Washington.
Daryl. Yeah.
Oh yeah, like I've painted probably 35 baits for him.
Mm.
And he's like, dude, he's like, this is the deal, or this is the deal. And he's like, I gotta have all these in, this color. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's awesome to me. Like, I love that. Or he'll send me a picture of a, you know, 8, 9 pounder, which for Washington standard, that's pretty big. And,
Yeah.
he's like, oh, I caught it on this, or but then you start hearing stories like he goes out there and fishes a bait, and he's like, he's like, I think if it would have had your paint job, like
Yeah.
that fish probably would have eat,
Yeah.
that I saw, something like that. Like that's the kind of stuff. That's the reason why I do it.
Right. Yeah, I think he talked about I think maybe you painted some canines for him around the time he was coming on the show. And I think he brought that up like he has a lot of confidence in the paint jobs and that's something that like he really believes in because I think that's what I asked him was if
Mm.
that was like a selling point for him. So, I guess I'll ask you first, what is your like do you like painting trout? I when I see your paint jobs, it's a lot of trout stuff. So, do you like painting trout baits or like do you like painting like crappie and gill patterns or like what's your favorite pattern if a customer sent you a bait and said paint me whatever you want, what's kind of your go-to, like your favorite to paint?
I mean, as far as what's going to look the best, probably a trout because I've
Okay.
done thousands of them. Like
Right.
I've spent so much time. I mean, it's just like anything else. The more you do, the better you're gonna get at it. So it's like, I, if somebody was like, "Oh, paint me your best thing," like I'm gonna go to a trout because I have a ton of confidence in that looking good. But I really enjoy messing with all these colors, and I wish people would like send me some of these other things to paint
Yeah.
because the more I am able to paint them, like the better they're gonna look.
Hmm.
Um, but like a trout color, like I can go through. I know what I'm doing on it, that kind of deal. I'm always learning stuff on it, but I have a pretty good idea of how I want to do it.
Yeah.
Like bluegill stuff and perch stuff and shad, like that stuff. I'll go through. I'll paint it once, and I'm like, I think I can change this, and I'll go back and do it again, or just keep doing stuff over and over until it looks good. But I can't keep somebody's bait hostage for a year as I sit
Right.
there and paint it and take the
Yeah.
paint off and paint it again. You know,
What so kind of we'll talk about I figured you were gonna say the trout, but I just wanted to make sure when somebody sends you a
yeah.
bait and they say I want a trout pattern, do guys kind of maybe send you like their trout that they have in mind, whether like their kid caught one out of their lake and say this is kind of what I want it to look like, or is it more so they're just like I want a rainbow trout, whatever you do, just put the works to it.
I mean, I always like it when they send me a picture of
Right.
their trout. I mean, every lake is different. It's
Yeah,
the same
100%.
as as kind of like the same thing as like how we were talking about. Every painter has like a different way of painting. Like every lake has a different looking trout, and it's the same thing with stocked trout. Even like
Right.
every hatchery has a different trout.
Right.
So I always want them to send pictures, but a lot of times it's like I post something on Instagram
And they just send it back to
and
you and
they're like,
say I
I
want this
gotta have
one.
this color.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd say that's probably 75% of the time. That's what it is. Like, oh, I gotta have this color.
Right.
You know. I think sometimes it's more of something just has to catch somebody's eye on like, not that they didn't know they wanted something, but they see a picture of it and
And
they're
they're
like,
sold.
you know, yeah, they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, that looks right.
You're
And
right.
everyone has a different opinion on it too.
Hmm.
That's like I do all these drops with, DRT baits and all these baits that I buy and, paint and sell. And I might paint a color and be like, this thing is absolutely insane. And then I put it on there and none of them sell. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's pretty crazy to me. Like
Right.
that color looked awesome. And
Yeah.
then I paint one and I'm like, I probably would have changed this or changed that.
And then
And
boom,
it's
gone.
like the best selling color ever. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I guess that's, everybody looks at it differently.
Right. Is crap, what was I gonna say? No. Oh, like when people so say somebody's listening to this and they're like, I want Garrett to paint my let's pick a bait, my canine, and they have pictures of the trout that they want to paint it for. Do you prefer videos over paint, like where they hold the fish and they shine it so you can see the different hues or whatever it may be? Do you prefer like one form of I guess like inspiration from another, whether it's a video or a photo?
I mean, if they really, really want it like looking like that trout, then
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, video is the best because I can get a better idea from it. I can get a pretty close idea from a picture.
Yeah.
And no, most of the time, like unless you're actually painting, I mean, it gets to a point where it's like, okay, how much is that going to really matter? Like you start looking at, you
Hues
know,
and
the little lines
speckles
in a
and
fin, or yeah, I mean, like little tiny things like. I've started doing it where I'm like trying to get like dots in the cracks of the scaling to look like, like all this like
Like
crazy
there's depth.
stuff where
Yeah.
to me it seems, yeah, to me it's like I'm achieving, part of nature and, you know, guys are like, "Oh, you could have just put the dot over the top and it would have, been fine." It's yeah.
Do you so like guys, I can't remember like dude, some like you watch a cooking show and they're putting the garnish on top of the really fancy dish and you're like, dude, I'm gonna eat this. Like I don't care. I don't really care what this looks like. Do you ever think like how you just said like guys are like, "Oh yeah, the dot looks good right there, but it would have looked good 3 inches over on the wherever, whatever it may be." Do you think that maybe some guys like send you a bait and they get it back and they're like, holy crap, this is like way more, like way more aesthetically pleasing than I was expecting him to do or I was expecting to get back from him.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time that's how guys are. I mean, at least, and I always tell them, like, if you get the bait and it doesn't look like how you want it, like, let me know.
Mhm.
That's how I grow as a painter. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's most guys are like, this is amazing, or they go fish it. And, I always tell people, like, go take it out in the water and see what you think, because paint changes once you put it in the water.
Yeah.
Um, like you start, especially soft baits. Soft baits change a lot.
Mm.
I tell people like they're like, oh, I want a bunch of this color in this section of the bait, or I want a bunch of, or this really bright. And I'm like, in the water, that's going to look really bright, or that's going to, do this or do that. And, most of the time I tell them like, how about I just do it this way and you go test it out. And if you don't like it, then we'll do it your way. And most of
Yeah.
the time they come back and they're like, yeah, I'm glad you told me not to do that because it's already plenty bright enough
Right.
or, looks good the way it is. Like I've spent so much time in, lakes with trout or, whatever I'm painting,
Mhm.
just sitting there looking at the fish. Like I'll catch a trout and I'm holding it in the water, turning it around in the water,
Yeah.
trying to see how it looks, and then take it out of the water. And I mean, you do all kinds of stuff like that, just trying to figure out how you can make, your paint look even better.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, you're never going to match nature, but you're pretty darn close.
Right. Is it ever hard to distinguish what guys want over like email or DM? Like, do you ever like just have to hop on a phone call with somebody and be like, dude, like explain this to me like I'm five, like exactly how you want it? Like, is there a lot of stuff missed in communication over text like that?
Not really. I mean, most guys are pretty like lenient on it. They're
Right.
just like, oh,
A
I
trout.
want this trout color,
Hmm.
and I'm like, well, do you want this, or how did the trout look in your lake? And they're like, ah, I think this one will just be fine. But I've had a couple guys where they're like, they're like, if you have any questions, call me, and I call them, and like we really go down the rabbit hole on trying to dial it in, and sometimes I enjoy that. Um, but yeah, I mean, most of the time I'd say they're pretty lenient on it. They're just kind of like, do what you think looks
Yeah.
best, and if you think it needs changes, then do that. So, and I never try and do, like when somebody asks for a paint job that I've done before, there's always a slight change to it.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty rare that I ever do the exact same color unless it's for like a drop and I'm painting like multiple at the same time. Because I basically don't buy any like true paints. Like I'm mixing all my stuff, so
Right.
it's
Yep.
never really the same.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean that's what I enjoy doing, and little color differences. Like I'm always asking for pictures from people, whether it's bluegill or shad or
Mhm.
trout or whatever it is. Like pictures are awesome. Same with videos.
Right. Do you ever get tired of like the hyper realistic paint jobs? Like, are you ever just like, dude, I just want somebody to send me a bait and they just want it white base with like a red sucker head, like the old classic Rapala? Or is there like ever a time where somebody's like, hey, dude, like, can you do something like that you're not used to doing? Like, is that kind of fun for you to switch it up every once in a while?
Yeah, I mean, like as far as money goes, like it's probably, it's better for me if it's
Right.
simple. But as far as like me painting, like it's almost like somewhat demoralizing when somebody's like, "Oh, I just want it white,"
Right.
and I'm like,
Just want a
I can
chrome.
do all this crazy.
Yeah.
yeah, like I can do all this crazy stuff and you just want it white. They're like, oh yeah, that'll work. I'm like, okay, or I see baits and it's not knocking anyone. I mean, look at like the pink lemonade color
Yeah.
that throwback's done. Like that color has done insanely well. And it's just a handful of colors. It's
Yeah.
pretty simple color, but
Yep.
you know, people are catching fish on it and like everybody likes it. Like
Mhm.
it's a neat looking color.
Yeah.
And I've tried that before. Like I've tried some simple colors where it's like, I'm just gonna do something simple and see how people like it. And I've noticed like with simple colors, it's either a hit or a miss.
Mm.
There's no in between. Like
Yeah.
people either love it or they hate it.
Yeah, yeah. That's always really how it seems. Like, dude, I will say the one thing that like for some reason a lot of people really like right now is like that 2D like Gancraft style paint. I'm not sure if you've been seeing that like on Facebook or
Like,
Instagram, but that's like something that a lot of
oh yeah,
guys like
like
right now. And
cartoon.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like the anime like 2D. And dude, like don't get me wrong, super cool. Like if I had a bait and I had a couple of them and I was like I just want to hang this up, in my fishing room or whatever, and like I wanted something like really pleasing to look at, dude, yeah, I'd put that on there. But that's not like something that I'd send you be like, Garrett, can you please paint me this, dude? I want to go chase the trout truck today with this color. Like, I don't know, like obviously different
Yeah.
strokes for different folks, literally, but it's just like some of the paint jobs that are out there, not like you said, not to bash anybody, but sometimes it's just like is that really what you guys were going for? Or is that like really, really what somebody wanted, or like what you were
Oh
doing? Like,
yeah.
like you said, either stuff sells or it doesn't sell, and it's pretty easy to figure that out fast.
Oh yeah. And like on a mass production level, like white is by far the best selling color. Like a pearl white bait
Mhm.
outsells any other color like ever. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, if you're talking a mag draft or anything like that, um, like even like the Osakana slide,
Yeah.
like the
Yep.
170 or a flag, something like that, like a pearl white one is probably going to outsell any other one. Um, but again, like me as a painter, like I watch that come back through the water and I'm like, there's no way a fish would bite that. I
Right.
give them way too much credit, apparently. I'm like,
Yeah.
wanting it to be exactly what they're eating, which, I get sometimes like that doesn't matter.
Hmm.
I like to mess around with some different stuff once in a while, but
Right.
I'm always trying to target like the realism side of things.
Hmm. The last like kind of big push of questions here for you. So you do like a lot of like you drop baits on your site, and then obviously like Bait Sanity does drops and yeah, Hog Hunter and stuff like that. When you like start on a batch of baits, how do you like to attack that? Like, do you sand them all down, or like do you prep them all at once, or do you do small batches so you're not like sitting at one stage of the process for 3 or 5 days at a time, or kind of how do you go about that?
I just do it in small batches. Like you know, I fish a lot, so I mean, I'll take it like one day at a time, and it's
Right.
like, okay, I'm gonna paint for 12 hours today, and I'm gonna do, you know, depending on the color, 10 to 20 baits maybe, or sometimes less. Especially if you're doing more batch stuff, you can do it a little faster. Like when it comes to customs, like it takes way longer to
Right.
do
Yeah. Yeah.
customs than because you're doing one color and then you're switching to the next color and
Cleaning out
doing
here,
all this different
whatever.
stuff. But oh yeah, yeah. I mean, mixing like I said, I mix all my stuff, so I'm trying to come up with different colors for that. And but yeah, I mean, I just take it like small batches at a time and go from there. I want to make sure it's all right, so But
Do you have a preference on like painting jerk baits relative to like a 7-inch glide, or like do you like a bigger canvas because you can fit more detail and like color shifts on it, or kind of what's your preference with that?
yeah, I mean, there's multiple reasons to the bigger stuff. Like we were talking about earlier, like money was one reason. Like people just don't want to pay a crazy amount for small stuff.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that like, 50 to $100 for a painted bait is a crazy amount. I mean, you look at like taxidermy work and stuff, and a lot of
Yeah.
these painters these days are extremely good. So it's, and I know how much time and effort is put into them. But yeah, I mean, I really don't do a whole lot of the smaller stuff anymore. I basically just like 6-inch minimum is kind of my deal anymore.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and that makes sense. Like you said, from a like from a selling standpoint, it makes the most sense of what somebody's going to buy with the price point you put on it for the work you put into it. I mean, that's kind of like the, the quote unquote break even mark of where people see it's worth their value and worth your time kind of meets in the middle right there. Supply and demand type style.
Yeah, like I fish a lot and I buy a lot of tackle and do all that kind of stuff, and it's kind of like, for me to spend 75 bucks on a crankbait is like, I don't really want to do that. I mean, you can only put so much into a crankbait and,
Yeah.
make it look as good as, and you have companies like Megabass or, Raid, all these like Japanese
Whoa,
companies
yeah.
that are doing these phenomenal paint jobs and retailing it for 20 bucks.
Hmm.
Like I can't compete with that.
Yeah.
So I just stick to the swim bait stuff, and that's I can put a lot into a swim bait, especially like the bigger it gets. I mean, you can put more and more detail into them to
Mhm.
where they're almost like taxidermy work.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you messed around like with any trout taxidermy or anything like that?
I haven't. I've thought about it. Like I've caught some giant fish these last couple of years, and I've thought about trying to do some taxidermy and that kind of stuff. But then I just go back like, I got pictures. I'll just call it
Yeah.
good there. Just don't really
Right.
mess with it at that point. I'd
Yeah.
rather go fishing than be spending, you know, tens of hours working on taxidermy because I'm the type of person that like I'm gonna sit there and go over it over and over and over again. I know Bass Jack did the same thing,
Right.
like his big largemouth that he did
Yeah. Yeah. That
taxidermy
one
on.
that he
Like
just
I'm
finished.
pretty sure he scrapped. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he scrapped the first one, and it's not because it didn't look bad.
Right.
Didn't look good. Like it looked amazing. It's just as a painter, like you sit there and you break down that fish over and over and over again, and you end up with a ton of time into it.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. And you just, and that's like, dude, that's literally a piece of art you put up and you sit and you dwell on it. Like you look at it. It's not a bait where you tie it on, you cast it out, you pull it up, you grab it, put it in your hand to rip some weeds off for the next cast. It's literally sitting on your mantle and you're staring at that thing for 20 years at a time. Like that's something that you have to be completely committed to and sold on from the point that you get the mold to the point that you finish clearing it. And you're like, yep, that is how it looked when I pulled it out of the water, and I am gonna be content with looking at that for the next 20 years. That's a hard sell for
Mhm.
a lot of people.
Oh, and I'm sure, like even I'm sure when Jason looks at that fish and he's like, 5 years from now, and he's painted for another 5 years, like he'll probably look at it and be like, I'm gonna probably change that. Like
Yeah,
there's gonna be things like I can almost guarantee it when he walks by that fish, like there's gonna be something that he's gonna want to change.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
just never gonna stop. Like as you do more and more, like
right. Yeah, and that's what I was gonna
it's
say. Like from this point, like perfect time when guys will be hearing this. This will be the second episode of 2025. So we'll say we're recording this at the end of December. So from December 2023 to December 2024, have you learned or have like you made changes in your process from painting baits and saying, oh, I can, like you said earlier, maybe not like shortcuts, but I can save time if I do it this way or if I do it this way. Like, do you continue to learn every year you do this?
yeah, I mean, as far as time saving, I've kind of hit a point where it's like,
It's pretty
unless
efficient.
I sacrifice quality,
Yeah.
I can't really save any time. Um, but I've learned like on some patterns, like for a trout, like trout is a really complicated pattern, but like I can do a trout faster than I can do a bluegill or something like that. Because I look at a bluegill, I'll paint a part on it, come back later, and I'm like, no, I don't like that. So then I keep going back and forth and back and forth. Like I may spend 3 hours on a bait that should have took me, an hour,
Right.
um, just because I'm never satisfied with it.
Mhm.
Like that whole like cartoony look type stuff. Like I just can't. I want it to look exactly like the
Yeah.
real thing. So I just keep going back and back and back until it looks right, which it's hard to do.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the point like where I was saying where I make a video or something some kind of post on Instagram or a reel like dude those Wednesday reels I put up every Wednesday. Dude, I'll sit down, I'm done talking to the camera and I start chopping it up and I'm like what the hell am I trying to say? Like I sound like a dummy. I need to set the camera back up, turn the lights back on. I need to refilm this video and I'm the type of person that like no matter how good it looks, I have to send it to like Marshall and Phoenix or Jeffrey and they have to tell me that it looks okay. I'm like, "Okay, well, if you guys think it looks okay, then I'm content with it." Like I am never really the type of person that's sold on my own stuff. I have to like have other people say that they think it looks okay or looks decent. So like, dude, the fact
Yeah.
that like we were talking about like the painting the models and stuff for like the taxidermy work, I could never do that. Or like you were saying, painting somebody's baits and you hold it for a year because you keep sanding it down and putting better paint job on it every couple weeks. Like that's exactly how I would be.
Yeah, and it's, I'm sure you go through the same stuff where like, you have guys tell you that, oh yeah, that, that's great or that's
Yeah,
great.
like
And you're
no, it's
like,
not.
yeah, you're like, it's not, but okay,
Yeah,
it's, it's good enough for now, I guess.
yeah,
That kind of deal. As much as like I hate to say that, where it's like you're not putting out what you think is the best possible thing, but you kind of have to get to a point where it's like if you sit there and again like hold the bait and keep painting it over and over again, like you're never going to get the bait to them. So
yeah.
like normally on that kind of stuff, like I've had guys ask me for paint jobs that I did like 2 years ago or something, and I try and stick away from that because
Mhm.
like I look at that stuff and I'm like that's not what I want to do now.
Right, yeah.
Like I feel like I can do better now, whether I can or not,
Mhm.
you know. But yeah, I try and keep it new and you know innovate on what I have.
Right. Heck yeah, dude. Wrapping it up here a little bit. So I send you a bait, shows up to you in the box or whatever. You cut the box open, you do all this painting and stuff. Kind of what's the process? Like, what's the process of kind of maybe not necessarily timeline, but like, what's the progression of the bait while it's there? Like, do you prep like five or six baits from different people in one batch and kind of paint them all as you go, or kind of what's the process like that?
It depends on what kind of baits I'm getting. Most of the time, I don't. Most of the time, like I try and do it where like I have a line of everybody's boxes. Like I write down when I received the package, what was in it, what colors they want, that kind of stuff. And I always try and get people to put like a note in there with what they want and their contact info, just in case I have any questions or I can't figure out, whose is what.
Yeah, what their
But like I'll
username is
mix
on
them in with
Instagram.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like if I'm painting something for, bait sanity and it's, let's say I'm painting a bluegill for them and I got a couple guys that want a bluegill color, but completely different. Like I'll put those customs in there and try and, kind of kill two birds with one stone by doing that. But, the custom stuff kind of takes its own time frame. Like there'll be some days where I just sit down and just do customs too. But like I said, it takes a lot longer to do customs than it
Right.
does, you know, basically production work. It's slow production work, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah, quote unquote production work as production work as you can
yeah,
get.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Heck yeah, man. And then say somebody's listening to this and they buy a bait from your site, like buy one of those Okasana swimmers. Uh, does that come like in the original packaging in the box shipped to them, or is it you bubble wrap it, or kind of how do you go
yeah,
about like when you repaint the
yeah. I
baits and
mean,
you have them on your site, how do you go about that?
yeah. I mean, they'll be in the original packaging. I just bubble wrap them, throw them in a box, and ship them your way. And
Heck yeah, dude.
yeah, I mean, like same thing with any of the baits that I get. If I buy baits from Clutch Swim Baits or whether it's a Spro bait or some other swim bait company, I always leave it in their packaging. And yeah.
Sweet. Where can the people find you and get a hold of you if they're interested in getting custom stuff done, or if your customs are open right now? I don't want to put you on the spot if you're not
Oh
custom
yeah.
painting right
Yeah.
now.
I'm always open for customs. Instagram's probably the best place. Just Garrett's Customs on Instagram, or you can email me at garrettscustoms@gmail.com. Those are probably the best places to get a hold of me. I try and be pretty quick on that, and um, turnaround times will vary, but most time it's like, you know, probably like 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the time of year.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I got to imagine like probably right now it's starting to get kind of busy with guys wanting stuff for the trout stockings and stuff, probably.
Oh yeah, I mean, guys wanting trout stuff, and I'm starting to work on some stuff with different companies, and uh, just kind of share the love a little bit around. And like I said, I enjoy painting different stuff, so I'm always working with different companies to paint up some stuff and get it in people's hands.
Right. Heck yeah, dude. What's the website for guys who don't know?
It's just garrettscustoms.com
Oh,
is my
okay.
website.
Easy. I know, as
Yep.
always, I'll put all of Garrett's stuff in the description, show notes, wherever you guys listen to this, so you guys can go follow him, and then as well as check out the website. While we're recording this, he last I knew, I think you still have some Okasana swimmers up on the site.
Yeah, there's a couple up there right now, and I'm gonna be. I was gonna do drops with them, but I think I'm just gonna load them on there just so guys can get them whenever they want.
Sweet.
I wanted to have some products. I'll have some Spro Chads going up here pretty soon. Some Clutch Ecos. I haven't announced any of this on Instagram yet, but here pretty soon I'll have all those going up, and then a bunch more Oscanas.
Heck yeah,
Um,
dude.
yeah, and I'm always kind of putting more baits on there. I'll have a bunch of clashes too, some clash
Oh,
nines.
sweet. Heck yeah, dude. Outside of that, is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap it up here?
I think I'm good.
Perfect. Heck yeah, man. But as always, I'll put all of Garrett's stuff in the show notes. You guys can go follow him on Instagram or check out the website if you guys aren't following him already or familiar with the website. As always, make sure you're following the podcast, Scales and Tales underscore media on everything. Outside of that, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Well, you guys, this is the second episode of the 2025 year. So hopefully, right around this time, we'll be starting the pre-orders for the newest magazine. Got a couple little small things to finish up on that, and then that will be done. So hopefully around this time we'll start that pre-order. But outside of that, we have a lot of cool stuff planned for 2025. Super excited for that. But as always, I want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank Garrett for coming on. We've been trying to get this one done for a little while now, and Garrett's finally like, "Hey, I'm free this day.
Yeah,
Let's do it." And I was like, "All right, man, we're doing it. It's set in stone. We're doing it."
I appreciate you having me on, and sorry for all the inconvenience on making it take so long, but we got her
Oh,
done.
yeah, no, you're good, man. You're good, man. 169, that's a good episode to be on. But as always, I want to thank you guys for
Yeah,
listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I appreciate Garrett coming on. Like I said, you guys can go follow him on everything. We'll have all that linked in the description. But as always, we'll see you guys next time.